heavy. One could represent it, and for those who are this is not part of the system. This is not currently part of the system. This is something we're introducing as a concept that's being used in Motif.
Why don't you push it over a little bit so it's inside of the bracket,
right.
just to be a little bit more.
A little bit better.
Better in terms of.
Sure.
Because otherwise, right, great.
Yeah. That's the symbol for heaviness. This is the thematic. And what we're talking about here is not specific. Yes, you move your arm to the right. Yes, you move it up. It's not about where you are in space or how fast you do it. That's already in the notation. Instead, it's about the attitude, the expression from inside of you, the theme that you want to impart, and how you feel as you do something. So that's what we're introducing here. Again, it has a beginning and an end, just as this has a beginning and an end, and the other bracket has a beginning and an end. But you could show here an effort. Now, I have been dealing with this in lava notation scores for some time. In the 70s, I remember doing scores on a Sokolo and being particularly frustrated on how one should introduce effort, because effort was the most important factor. She didn't care where you ended up in space. You could end up over here, or you could end up over here. Different people ended up in different places or in different performances. What she really cared about was getting the full effort in, getting that dynamic, that feeling from inside of you. And I wanted to make sure my scores had effort in them, but I wasn't sure how. Oftentimes I used that, but was unsatisfied, or overlapping brackets. And how do you express the fact that sometimes it's there, it might be there for an instant, but it doesn't matter if it's there at that exact moment or at that exact moment. She just wanted that push to happen.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
So I haven't seen many scores that are using effort signs, and then but with this bracket.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why you felt that you need to create something new.
Right. It's actually Charlotte who's.
Yeah.
Well,
Where's the confusion?
because really Lynn has said, and I'm repeating, because we have two ways. We can say there are times, certainly in LMA, when you're talking about, for example, if you're going to lava notate physical exercise, let's say, and you wanted to talk specifically and say, this, and this happens, and I want to be very exact and tell you in each moment in this triplet exactly what happens, and they all have to be like this, just like this. And when you use that bracket, because it's used in other ways to say everything that I'm telling you about within the boundaries of this bracket must be whatever is inside of this bracket, must be direct, must be light.
Be heavy.
But when we were performing it before, and a choreographer, would say, listen, do these triplets, and I want it to be about lightness. Well, in fact, when the people are doing it, they're not being light for every single moment, just like we were. And this is something you didn't talk about, the lightness is going to have other things with it. It might be, and Paul's, maybe Paul, when Paul did sustained, I think he went sustained and heavy. When I was doing it, I probably was being sustained and light. But that's not what the choreographer says. The choreographer says, what I want you to think about is being light. So none of these
put in those other
right.
efforts,
So
but
the bracket was
theme-
the bracket was invented to allow us to be able to specify that we're thinking of what is important over time and what aspect of the combinations that you're using. And that's why now we have a way of talking about effort and other aspects of movement thematically, and we have a way of showing them specifically. There's another way of showing specifically, but I'm not going to talk about that now.
But can you have two different effort in one thematic bracket?
Yeah,
Sure.
I
More
think
than
so.
one?
For
Yeah,
example,
great.
you can be heavy and sustained. That's heavy sustained.
You're talking about in the same combination at
In
the same
combination.
time.
Or
Right.
you can have one combination that
Scatter
follows
and
another. Here, let's take the bracket. Here we were doing scattering and gathering. So here we could have a bracket here and a bracket here. Sorry, it's not written perfectly here, but so first we were scattering, and then we were gathering. Oops, I'm doing it wrong. This one.
It's got to be straight on the
Right.
straight. Right.
Like that.
And maybe this one is not. It should be. It's not
Oh,
drawn
it's
real.
not as straight as it
Yeah,
should
it
be.
should be.
Straighter. So here we have the scatter and the gather. And it shows you the timing, is where the bracket begins and ends.
Did you understand, Mira, what I'm saying? Do you understand what we mean, first of all, by the idea of over time?
Yeah.
Something?
So I try to now remember that when you first explain about the bracket, but then I try to really the definition of the bracket. I know how the bracket has implied in notation, but that I try to really figure out really that bracket really meant that each step, like
Right. It's
like
not,
example like a
it doesn't
small
mean-
step.
Right. This
So
one,
I don't know if
this
bracket
one
has other
means-
meanings.
This,
that-
you're talking
yeah.
about
this
this thematic bracket
No,
with the two.
This
the
one,
bracket.
this one
Addition
means
bracket.
Oh,
this.
the addition bracket.
Right, the addition bracket adds 1 + 1
Well-
distributed property.
I just want to say the history of this too, and that is coming out of also my experience at the time that I was thinking about this to begin with. I was, writing scores, but I was also at LIMS, and there was a great deal of confusion, about how to write effort, because everybody, if you look in scores, one person uses this, one person uses this, one person uses that, and
Can you
these,
show how many different ways notators have been
Well,
using?
Here,
Like that's
it could be within this,
they would use the round bow.
right, with an effort. The heaviness could, sometimes they'd use it
I
like that.
I haven't seen that.
I've
but
done it.
maybe,
I've
yeah,
done it
okay.
in
More
my
in the
scores.
past,
If
maybe.
you look at the Sokolo scores I
Okay.
started out, that's how I started out, because it's a passing state bracket. That applies to, and I might have put it on a particular, boom, you wanted a punch, which is this symbol. And I'd put it like that for that symbol, draw it around that, just to say, so that would be, boom, a punch, a strong, direct, quick effort to get there, even though it's in that much time. I wanted to emphasize it is a punch. But I wasn't all that happy with how everything came out when I used that bracket.
Then I'll show you some other
Sure,
ways that
sure.
I wrote a whole paper about this at the time, and I'll try to, I could, maybe find it and then put it, it was just about all the different ways. All right, so also, Also, people would do, not necessarily in LN scores, but certainly in the LIMS community, you know, and it's in books, you know, Mary and Norris books about using effort to record developmental ideas. They would do this. So you use this. They'd use this. They'd use, and they still do this. And there's no way of knowing, is this thematic or is this specifically only, let's say, is this only light and sustain, or is it light, sustain, direct? Do you see what I mean? This is, and in Laban scores, which I find very, very trying, is that sometimes they do without a bow. They just see something like this.
Oh, an effort just
Like
hanging
this,
on
or let's say, you know, just put it here. I don't remember what that was. Was it like this? Whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And does that mean that only this?
Is direct and strong?
Does that mean this whole thing? How long does this last? When did it start? There's no sense of, so you can kind of know, you know, the style and you kind of guess, but
See, here you can also differentiate by saying the scattering is done by the arm.
Right. Yeah, so I mean,
So scatter with the arm, and you know, I don't know if you want to do that or that, but that also applies just to the arm. It might apply to the whole body. You know, you may feel of a scatter from the body standpoint.
okay. So I mean, like when we perform over there, like my confusion more between this addition bracket we commonly use, then you recreate the new idea. Between these two, I'll just try to see it, like, do we really need it, or
Right.
how do we make the difference? But for example, what you just explained about, so far I've been using this bracket, and
Sure.
if it's only applied to the arms, we say arm, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's so it only applies to the arm. That's
Right.
how I've been using, and I've seen some of other notators using like that. But but my real question is, when I kind of see what you mean the overall,
Whole
yes.
time.
But when I really perform it with the triplet,
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
You didn't get that.
I
sense.
didn't. Yeah. Every like a step, my intention was had a like heaviness or like lightness. I applied to every.
You did it to every step.
Yeah. So do we really make a difference?
But of course you didn't when you did the quickness.
When
I
you
thought of
did
a
it,
lightness and
you're thinking about it. You're saying, or here's another example.
So that's
okay?
why this also.
But this is about your thinking, not necessarily exactly as it's performed.
Okay.
You know, it's the theme. It's how your thoughts are going when you do it, which makes the movement quality different.
Therefore, without the sign for the arm, the thematic bracket, it can be the whole torso, the whole arms, or just
Right.
just the arms without
Right.
the torso.
Right.
Because
With-
there's
But
no
you
specific.
do have the
there's
torso
no specific,
moving,
you know.
but it isn't about, you know, you have to, it's a different way of thinking about it. You can have the same exact positions in space, but be thought of in very different ways. Just as we did the triplets, you had the same rhythm, the same positions in space, but you did them differently.
It gives more interpretation for different.
It's also you
a
can
mental
talk about
attitude.
it, but for me, the reason it's necessary in documenting dance and capturing what the choreographer usually says, or the way that dancers usually think about the movement. Let me give another movement example. Supposing the choreographer says, I want you to do these swings, right? And what I want you to be doing, make sure when you're swinging.
Charlotte,
Oh, I'm
can
so
you
sorry.
can you go the other side?
All right, I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go swing, swing, all right? And the choreographer might say, now I want you to do this swing with heaviness. Swing, swing, all right? Actually, if you really know, you know, and you're observing correctly, this thing was about, the only part of it where you get heavy is you go heavy. But when you come out of the heaviness, this is not about heavy. It's heavy, and now I'm not heavy. Heavy, now I'm
It's the
not heavy.
contrast.
Do you
But
see?
the emphasis is on the heavy.
He's saying, you know, am I going to write, be free, and then be heavy, now be free, now be light, be free, now be heavy and quick, am I going to write all that? No, that's not what the choreographer wants.
One
you
of
to
the
be
interesting things that I
focusing on.
found when I was in notator training is we had a person there who was not a dancer. And she wrote every single little detail. She was very good at code, at figuring out a code. She could look at something, and when she did a grand plie, she wrote, bend the knee 1 degree, bend the knee 2 degrees, bend the knee 3 degrees, bend the knee 4 degrees, bend the knee 5 degrees, bend the knee 6 degrees, straighten the knee, you know, boom, 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 each of the levels. But it didn't make sense from a dancer's standpoint. We have the capability of writing the detailed description of everything, but we don't. We write them in the way that a dancer perceives movement. And in the same way that Charlotte is talking about this dynamic, we could write every little detail, but it would just be confusing, and it would, to sort it out, just, if you write it in the way a dancer thinks about it, like it's heavy, or the choreographer describes it, it becomes much clearer for the reader, becomes much clearer for the dancer.
Yeah, I would say that the what I call the literal notation, in which you write what's happening, all that's happening moment by moment, and that it applies whatever you're writing in a very literal way, that is necessary for certain purposes, right? It depends upon why you're writing, what the purpose is. I would hold that in terms of effort, most of the time in my experience, writing what a choreographer wants, he's not thinking and not asking the dancers to think in that way. He's asking the dancers to think in this more thematic way about effort. And they're both important and valuable ways of documenting movement, but if you use this general way when you need specific, or when you literal, and when you use literal when you need the thematic, you won't be recording the intent that the choreographer is asking you for. Mm-hmm.
But then, what I'm thinking with additional bracket, yeah, no, it's not
that.
right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, currently, I think the problem is because it wasn't really standardized how
Exactly.
effort being used.
Exactly.
But then, if a rule being established using additional bracket inside with effort shape, then why do we need to use a thematic
Well, what we're
bracket,
talking
like
about-
inventing a new?
Well, we're talking about a different concept here. It isn't that we're making a rule for effort. We're not doing that. What we're saying is there are times, there are themes. And this comes from often, improvisation. You've got motif notation. There's a theme. I don't care where you are in space, but what you're going to aim at is have a focus on the window. And different people can have focus on the window in different ways. There's a theme there. There's a theme of being strong and punching, and you can move in different ways. What I'm showing here is applying that same concept that's being used in motif notation. The theme, the overall, what is the intent? What is it your mind focusing on? and using the bracket that way. These others don't.
May, you see, this is the thing, that supposing I have a Lava notation score, in which, for whatever reason, because of what it's recording, I want to make a statement. Every single thing that this bracket, records must be done with this particular effort,
Here.
and literally only using this combination. It cannot be strong and direct and quick. It must only be what that is. Literally, it has to be. Supposing I have a Lava notation score like that, and I put that in the and I use that
Additional
sometimes to mean that, and sometimes I use it to mean what we use the thematic bracket is. How do I know? Am I going to glossarize and say
Every single time.
every time say in my glossary, listen, we're using this bracket, but this is what it means in this score.
Or this is what it means for measures 3, 4, and 5. But in measures, over here, it means something different. And
you
the
don't
thing
want to
bracket-
use the same symbol to mean
many different
things. And especially when you're talking about something that has to do with the whole way we're conceiving of the movement.
But then in Lava notation, it's not. It's a lot of incidents is one symbol in different columns. Then it means different things.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's
So
why.
that's my what I wanted to find out is exact definition of the addition bracket. I want to know the definition of this first, but I don't find anywhere. As you know, Blackpin, we have 100 per meanings definitions. It depends on how you use.
Right.
So I mean,
And here
I'm not against it. Like it's a great
it's
idea,
the
but it's,
distributive process.
yeah.
It's
So when this
distributive.
bracket is
She
used
has
with
it.
the effort, then kind of it already
It applies to each
implies
and every one of
thematics.
these. No,
Right.
no,
No,
it's
that's what I was
thematic.
like.
Yeah, it isn't thematic.
okay.
It applies to each and every one of the movements. Each and everything
Right.
inside of that, it distributes just the same way that we distributed an X. When we distributed the symbol that means small.
Right.
Small step, small step, small step. Or you write the steps and you put a bracket on that say an X, and so we distributed. It's the equivalent of distributing it to each and every symbol. Here, it's a different thing. It's a concept in your mind. It may not appear in every step.
It's like, yeah, right, well, just
Yeah.
repeating.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, why do we need it? Because we already have a way of writing it.
No, it's not that we have a way of writing it, because as far as I know, it's not being consistent how notator use
Okay, that's
the
right.
efforts, including in Lava notation score.
Right.
And I think a lot of the use of effort in notation scores isn't necessarily about themes. It may be about an individual symbol. This has to be strong, or this has to be, but they don't think in terms of at least from what I've seen, don't think in terms of a whole series of movements that have to be gathering.
Well, could we?
With the whole body gathering, or with, I think we make the scores with the literal notation of where the body is in space without writing that intent.
No, well,
because we haven't known how to do it.
one thing I think it bothered me a little bit is, I think for motif notation, of course, then you have emphasis on, look at this is the focus, then work on that thing. But then because in Lava notation, it's like you are looking at so many symbols at the same time. Meanwhile, you put this thematic ball saying, yeah, this is the most important thing that you should look at. But then, in reality, when you're looking at the Lava notation score, very often it's the emphasis could be somewhere else.
Well, that's why you start reading there. You know, when you start reading any score, you start with just figuring out, okay, what does this say?
Right,
You know?
right.
So you're not looking at all the motivation, the intent, and all of that. You start usually by looking at this part, and then you move on to outward. You move on to the body. Okay, and then at the end you start saying, okay, now I'm going to dance it. What is this intent? You know, that's how you read it.
And if you put, I mean, I'm going to backtrack a minute, picking up on what the two of you are saying, which to me is very important, very useful. And Paul said something too that we completely went away from to get back to, because it was very interesting. But just maybe what we, for the future, as we begin to integrate the idea of writing thematically and having a way of writing thematically and being able to write literally. And you understand what I mean by these two different ideas, right? That we let's assume that sometimes in Laban notation we need one, and sometimes in Laban notation we may need the other. It's valuable to have both these ways of writing. What we maybe need to do is think in terms of standardizing not only the thematic way of writing, which we're arguing now that this is a strong possibility, but also standardizing how we write about effort in this literal way, and so we might, for example, and I suspect when you're at ICL, and if Peggy Hackney or other people are there, they would say, do you see this one with the line?
Yes.
They would
Duration.
say that is a way of writing literally, right? Or maybe Laban notators would say, oh, that's too fussy, you've got a thing, but maybe we'll use this bracket to mean
the other thing
literal.
about this, the other confusion about writing like this is typically, as this is the starting point, this is the ending point. Do you start getting light, and is that achieved at the end of the symbol?
Right.
So, or is it recreated in each step along the way, or each arm movement along the way? You know, is it getting more and more light as you're doing the movement?
I mean,
Or
it sounds like
is this a thematic thing that applies differently to the movements within?
We have to say, all of those things have to come into play, because effort is much more complicated in a way than quantitative things. There's so many other aspects, as Lynn is alluding to it right now, that we have to get into. But whatever the symbols are, can we come to an agreement on what we need to be able to write thematically? We need to make it literally. Maybe we need to write literally, but not about every aspect of it. I mean, there may be different things that we need to be able to say, and we need to be able, it would be useful to come to some standardized way of writing these different things. Right now, Lynn is talking about introducing this idea of thinking in this way that I think that we didn't even realize that we were thinking about. This is the way of thinking.
Sometimes we put it in a lot of word notes. Of course,
Right.
They aren't translated into other languages. When people read it somewhere else, they may not get the concept. You know, we will put, do this movement while scattering, think of scattering seeds as you're doing the movement, you know. We've done that in scores as well.